My parents sold my 8-year-old daughter's cello for cash. They claimed they needed the money to build a swimming pool for the family to enjoy. What they did not know was that the cello was an authentic Giuseppe Galliano made in 1780, and it was worth $185,000. But that was not their biggest mistake. Their biggest mistake was forgetting who actually owned the land they were digging up for their new pool. When my grandmother found out what they had done to her great-granddaughter, she did not scream. She simply called her lawyer and opened the family trust documents. By the time this story ends, my parents would wish they had never touched that instrument. Before I continue this story of betrayal and sweet justice, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe that you should never touch what does not belong to you. My name is Simone, and I have spent my entire life trying to buy my parents' affection with achievements. I became a top art curator in Atlanta, hoping that my success would finally make them look at me the way they looked at my younger sister, Ebony. But last week, I realized that some people are just black holes of need, capable of swallowing everything you love without a second thought. It was a humid Tuesday afternoon when I drove my Mercedes down the winding driveway of my parents' estate in Buckhead. My daughter Maya was bouncing in the back seat. We had just returned from a week-long youth orchestra camp in New York. Maya is a prodigy. At 8 years old, she does not just play the cello, she speaks through it. The instrument she plays was a loan from my great-grandmother Rose. It was her most prized possession, a piece of history with a voice like warm honey and dark chocolate. Because my own house was undergoing a security system upgrade, I had made the fatal error of leaving the cello at my parents' house for safekeeping. As I parked the car, the first thing I noticed was the noise. It was a grinding mechanical roar that shattered the peace of the wealthy neighborhood. I stepped out and saw an excavator in the backyard tearing up the manicured lawn. Piles of red Georgia clay were stacked high, and the smell of diesel fuel hung heavy in the air. Maya did not care about the construction. She unbuckled her seatbelt and sprinted toward the house, her braids flying behind her. "I need to check on cello," she yelled. She named the instrument simply cello as if it were a person. I followed her, dragging our suitcases up the front steps. The house felt strangely open, the front door unlocked. I walked into the foyer expecting to see the cello case standing in the corner of the formal living room where I had left it. The spot was empty. Panic is a cold thing. It starts in your stomach and grips your throat. I told myself to breathe. Maybe they moved it to the study. Maybe they put it in the climate-controlled wine cellar to protect it from the humidity. Then I heard the scream. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure loss. It was the sound a mother makes, but it was coming from my 8-year-old child. I dropped the suitcases and ran. I found Maya in the guest room. She was kneeling on the floor, her small hands clutching the velvet interior of the hard-shell flight case. The case was open, and it was empty. The emptiness of that case felt violent. It was like looking at a coffin with the body missing. The indentations where the cello body should have rested were still there, ghost outlines of the instrument. The bow was gone too, the rosin, everything. Maya looked up at me, her face wet with tears, her eyes wide with a confusion that broke my heart. "Where is it, Mama?" she whispered. "Where is cello?" I pulled her into my arms, my mind racing. Had we been robbed? But why would a thief take a cello and leave the silver tea set on the sideboard? Why would they leave the flat-screen television mounted on the wall? "Stay here, baby," I said, my voice shaking. I marched out to the patio. My mother, Patricia, was sitting at the glass table under a large umbrella. She was wearing a floral caftan and oversized sunglasses, sipping iced tea as she watched the excavator dig a massive hole in the yard. She looked like the queen of a construction site. "Mom," I shouted over the noise of the machinery. "Where is the cello?" Patricia didn't even turn her head. She took a long sip of her tea, the ice cubes clinking against the glass. "Oh, you are back early," she said, her voice casual as if I had asked about the weather. I walked around the table and stood directly in front of her, blocking her view of the dirt pit. The cello, Mom. The Gagliano. It is not in the case. Where is it? She sighed, a dramatic exhalation that suggested I was being incredibly tedious. That old thing, honestly, Simone, it was just taking up space. It smelled like old wood and varnish. It was cluttering up the living room, and you know how I feel about clutter. My hands curled into fists at my sides. What did you do with it? She waved a manicured hand dismissively. I got rid of it. Brad said he knew a guy who buys used instruments for school bands or something. We cleared it out. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I felt dizzy. You got rid of it. I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You sold it. Patricia finally took off her sunglasses and looked at me. Her eyes were devoid of guilt. Instead, she looked annoyed. Yes, Simone, we sold it. And you should be thanking us. Do you see that hole in the ground that is going to be a saltwater pool? A heated infinity-edge saltwater pool. Brad said the cost of the pool was exactly what that guy offered for the violin thing. It was destiny. It is a cello, I snapped. And it was not yours to sell. Patricia rolled her eyes. Oh, stop being so dramatic. It was just an old wooden box. It had scratches on it. It wasn't even new. And besides, Maya is too small for it. Ebony is pregnant with her third baby, and she said, swimming is the only thing that helps her back pain. We did this for the family. We turned a useless object into something everyone can enjoy. I stared at her. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, and I saw a stranger. I saw a woman so consumed by her own comfort, so obsessed with appearances, that she could not see the value of anything unless it was flashy and new. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That was not a used instrument for a school band. That cello was made in 1780. It was appraised for insurance at $185,000. Patricia laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. Don't lie to me, Simone. You always try to make yourself sound so important. $100,000 for a fiddle, please. Brad said the guy was doing us a favor taking it off our hands. He gave us $5,000 cash for the deposit and said he would handle the rest of the pool payments. Brad is in finance, Simone. He knows the value of things. Brad is in debt, Mom. I screamed, losing control. Brad is an unemployed real estate agent who drives a leased BMW he cannot afford. Do not speak about your brother-in-law that way, she yelled back, slamming her tea glass down. He is a good man. He is helping us improve this property. And what do? You spend all your money on old paintings and dusty instruments. You are selfish, Simone. You have always been selfish. I looked back at the house. I could see Maya standing in the doorway, her small body trembling. She had heard everything. She heard her grandmother call her beloved instrument a useless object. She heard that her passion had been traded for a hole in the ground. I turned back to Patricia. The rage inside me was no longer hot. It had turned into something cold and hard like steel. You have 24 hours to get it back, I said. Patricia picked up her magazine and started reading, dismissing me entirely. It is done, Simone. The deal is closed. The pool is happening. Go buy Maya a keyboard or a flute, something smaller. Now move, you are blocking my view of the construction. I stood there for a moment watching the excavator claw at the red earth. They were digging a hole. A deep, expensive hole. They thought they were building a status symbol. They did not realize they were digging their own grave. I walked back to the house, picked up my weeping daughter, and walked out the front door. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I simply took out my phone and dialed the number for the police. My mother thought the conversation was over. She thought she had won. She thought that because she was my mother, I would just swallow the hurt and move on like I always did. But she was wrong. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about Maya. And for Maya, I would burn this entire estate to the ground. I buckled Maya into the car. Mommy, she sobbed. Is Cello gone forever? I wiped her tears and started the engine. No, baby, I said. We are going to get it back, and then we are going to take everything else. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the house. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw Brad's car pulling into the driveway. He was smiling, probably coming to celebrate his big deal. I watched him get out and high-five the construction foreman. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Brad," I whispered. I drove straight to the police station. But as I would soon find out, the law is not always on the side of the righteous. Sometimes to get justice, you have to stop playing by the rules and start playing the game. And nobody plays the game better than the woman who taught me everything I know, my great-grandmother Rose. But first I had to face the police and the lies my family was already spinning to protect themselves. My confrontation with my mother was interrupted by the sound of a sliding glass door opening. The heavy thud of the track echoed against the noise of the excavator. I turned to see the man who had orchestrated the destruction of my daughter's legacy. Brad stepped out onto the patio carrying the distinct air of a man who believes he is the smartest person in every room despite all evidence to the contrary. He was wearing a polo shirt that was 2 sizes too tight, the fabric straining against a stomach softened by years of cheap beer and avoiding manual labor. In his hand was a bottle of domestic lager condensation dripping onto his khaki shorts. He took a slow, deliberate sip, looking at me over the rim of the bottle with a smirk that made my skin crawl. Brad was my sister Ebony's husband. He was a 35-year-old real estate agent who had not sold a house in 2 years, yet somehow always had advice on how everyone else should manage their finances. "Whoa there, Simone," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Lower the volume. You are scaring the contractors. We are trying to run a professional operation here." I felt a vein throb in my temple. The audacity of this man was breathtaking. He was standing in my parents' backyard drinking their beer, supervising a project paid for with stolen money, and telling me to be professional. "I am not speaking to you, Brad," I said, my voice icy. "I am speaking to my mother about the property you stole." Brad chuckled and walked over to where my mother sat, placing a possessive hand on her shoulder. Patricia leaned into him, looking at him with the adoration she usually reserved for television evangelists. "See, Patricia," Brad said, ignoring me and addressing my mother. "This is exactly what I was telling you about. Emotional attachment to depreciating assets. It clouds judgment. Simone is upset because she is thinking with her heart, not her head." He turned his gaze back to me, adopting the tone of a kindergarten teacher, explaining algebra to a toddler. "Listen, Simone. Let me break this down for you, so you can understand the economics of the situation. That cello was what we in the industry call a dead asset. It was sitting in a case gathering dust, generating zero revenue. It had zero liquidity. It was essentially dead wood." He took another swig of beer and gestured grandly toward the muddy pit in the yard. "Now look at this pool. This is a capital improvement. By installing a luxury infinity pool, we are instantly increasing the appraisal value of this property by at least 15%. I ran the comps myself. We liquidated a stagnant item to fund a high-yield investment. It is basic asset reallocation. You should actually be thanking me. I just secured your inheritance." I stared at him, stunned by the sheer magnitude of his delusion. He was throwing around buzzwords he had probably learned from a YouTube video trying to mask theft as financial wizardry. "My inheritance?" I asked, stepping closer to him. "You think selling a stolen instrument to dig a hole in the ground is securing my inheritance?" Brad rolled his eyes and sighed as if my stupidity was exhausting him. "It is not just a hole, Simone. It is a lifestyle upgrade. It adds curb appeal. And honestly, we did you a favor. That big case was an eyesore. Ebony needs a stress-free environment for the baby. You know, since she is actually providing grandchildren for this family." The jab at my single status and my career focus was predictable. Brad loved to remind me that while I had a master's degree and a 6-figure income, I did not have a husband. To him, that made me a failure. To me, his existence was the best advertisement for staying single I had ever seen. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. I needed him to understand exactly what he had done. I needed to wipe that smug look off his face before I destroyed him. Brad, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. You keep talking about value. You keep talking about assets. So let's talk numbers. Since you are the expert, tell me. How much did you get for the cello? Brad shrugged, feigning disinterest. Market value. We got a fair price for a used instrument. 5 grand down and the guy covers the pool installments. It was a steal. $5,000, I repeated. You sold it for $5,000. Brad smirked. Hey, cash is king. It was quick money. I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor. You idiot! You absolute incompetence idiot! Brad's smile faltered. My mother gasped. Simone. Patricia scolded. Do not insult your brother-in-law. I ignored her. I locked eyes with Brad. That dead asset you just sold for $5,000 was a Giuseppe Galliano. It was crafted in Naples in the year 1780. It has been in my family for 4 generations. I had it appraised last year for insurance purposes. Do you want to know the valuation, Brad? Do you want to know the return on investment you just flushed down the toilet? Brad shifted his weight, looking slightly uneasy for the first time. You are bluffing, he muttered. It was just an old fiddle. It had scratches on it. It is called patina, Brad, I yelled, and the valuation was $185,000. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the excavator seemed to stop its grinding for a second. Brad blinked. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at my mother, then back at me. Then slowly the smirk returned. He let out a loud, mocking laugh. Okay, wow. Good one, Simone. 185 grand. Sure. And I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. You really expect us to believe that Grandma Rose, who clips coupons for cat food, was sitting on a fortune like that? You are delusional. He took a long drink of his beer, regaining his confidence. You are just making up numbers to scare Patricia. It is a classic manipulation tactic. You are jealous that we are improving the house, so you invent this fantasy about $1 million violin. You need therapy, Simone. Seriously, you are projecting your own insecurities onto this family. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. He did not believe me. He was so arrogant, so convinced of his own superior intellect, that he could not conceive of a reality where he had made a mistake. It is not a fantasy, Brad, I said. And it is not my property. That cello belongs to the Rosewood Family Trust. It was on loan to Maya. By selling it, you did not just steal from me. You stole from the trust. You stole from Great-Grandma Rose. Brad laughed again, waving his hand dismissively. Grandma Rose. The woman is 90 years old. She thinks the television remote is a phone. She does not even know what day it is. You think I am scared of a senile old lady? Even if it was worth something, which it is not, she won't remember she had it. I did everyone a favor. I cleaned out the attic. He stepped forward, invading my personal space. He smelled of sweat and cheap cologne. Now listen to me. You are going to stop this drama. You are going to get in your fancy car, go back to your lonely apartment, and let us enjoy our new pool. If you keep harassing Patricia with these lies, I will have to step in as the man of the house. I will not let you stress out my pregnant wife or her mother with your hysteria. Hysteria. The favorite word of mediocre men everywhere when they are faced with a woman who knows more than them. I looked at my mother. She was nodding in agreement with him, looking at me with disappointment. He is right, Simone, she said. You are being unreasonable. Just go home. I looked back at Brad. He was grinning, thinking he had won. He thought he had put me in my place. He thought the conversation was over. You are right, Brad, I said softly. I should go. I turned around and walked back toward my car. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was crystal clear. Brad had just admitted to everything. He admitted to selling it. He admitted to knowing it belonged to the trust. And he had insulted the one person in this family who was more dangerous than I was. As I reached for the door handle of my Mercedes, I heard Brad shout one last thing from the patio. "Don't forget to come to the pool party next month. Bring a swimsuit if you can fit into one." I got into the car and slammed the door. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I saw the recording app was still running. I had recorded every single word. Brad thought he was the expert on assets. He thought he knew the value of things. But as I started the engine and drove toward the police station, I knew one thing for sure. Brad had no idea that he had just become the biggest liability in the history of this family. And unlike the cello, there would be no one willing to buy him when I was done. The drive to the precinct was short, but my list of allegations was long. I thought the law would help me. I thought the police would see the theft for what it was. But as I walked up the steps of the station clutching my phone and my righteous anger, I was about to learn that in this town, the truth does not matter as much as the story you tell. And my parents were already telling a very different story. The sun began to set over the construction site in the backyard, casting long, jagged shadows across the dining room table. The smell of roast beef and rosemary filled the house, a deceptive aroma of domestic bliss that made my stomach churn. I sat at the end of the long mahogany table, my hands clasped tightly together, waiting. I was waiting for the one man I believed would set this right. My father, Desmond. Growing up, Desmond was the disciplinarian of the household. He was a man of rules of order, of clear lines between right and wrong. He was a retired military officer who ran his home with the precision of a barracks. While my mother, Patricia, was prone to flights of fancy and emotional manipulation, my father was the anchor. He valued integrity. He valued property rights. He was the one who had taught me that if you borrow a pencil, you return it sharpened. I clung to that memory of him like a lifeline. I told myself that once Desmond came home and saw the destruction in the yard, once he heard that his son-in-law had pawned a family heirloom without permission, the hammer would fall. He would strip Brad of his arrogance. He would force my mother to apologize. He would retrieve the cello. Across the table, Patricia was arranging napkins as if she hadn't just sanctioned a felony. Brad was already seated, scrolling through his phone, looking unbothered. Ebony, my younger sister, waddled into the room, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. She gave me a tight, pitying smile. "You are still here?" Ebony asked, her voice light and airy. "I thought you would have stormed off by now. You usually do when you don't get your way." I did not answer her. I just stared at the front door. Finally, the lock turned. The heavy oak door swung open and my father stepped in. He looked tired, his suit jacket slung over his arm, his tie loosened. He was a tall man, imposing, with graying hair and skin the color of deep espresso, the same shade as mine. "Honey, you are home," Patricia chirped, rushing to kiss his cheek. "We have a surprise for you in the backyard." Desmond looked at me, giving a curt nod, then looked at the sliding glass doors. "A surprise?" he asked, his voice gravelly. Brad jumped up, eager to take credit. "Come see Desmond." I finally pulled the trigger on the upgrade we talked about. My father walked to the window. I stood up, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment of truth. Desmond stared out at the muddy pit, the excavator, and the chaos that had replaced his manicured lawn. He stood there for a long time, silent. I held my breath, waiting for the explosion, waiting for him to ask who authorized this, where the money came from, why the yard looked like a war zone. Instead, a slow smile spread across his face. "Well, I will be damned," he said softly. "It is huge." Brad beamed. "It is an infinity pool, sir. Saltwater system. Heated. It is going to add 50,000 to the property value overnight. And it is perfect for the grandkids." Desmond turned around, his eyes shining. He clapped a hand on Brad's shoulder, shaking him firmly. "Good initiative, son. I have been saying for years this house needed a water feature. I just never wanted to deal with the contractors. You handled all of this." Brad puffed out his chest. "Start to finish, sir." I secured the financing and managed the crew. "Financing?" I interrupted, unable to stay silent any longer. I stepped forward, my voice trembling with disbelief. Dad, ask him where the financing came from. Ask him what he sold to pay for that hole in the ground. Desmond looked at me, his smile fading slightly. Simone, I didn't know you were staying for dinner. Dad, listen to me, I pleaded. They stole Maya's cello, the Galliano from Great-Grandma Rose. Brad took it out of the case and sold it to a pawn shop for cash to pay the deposit on that pool. They sold a family heirloom without asking. I waited for the shock. I waited for the anger. Desmond looked at Brad. Brad shrugged, putting on his best innocent face. It was gathering dust, Desmond. Simone is making a big deal out of nothing. It was just sitting there. I liquidized a dead asset to improve the family home. My father looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw something that broke me more than the theft itself. I saw indifference. Simone, he sighed, walking over to the head of the table and sitting down. Why do you always have to bring drama into this house? Drama, I choked out. Dad, that is theft. That instrument is worth nearly $200,000, and even if it was worth $10, it wasn't theirs to sell. Desmond picked up his fork, signaling that the conversation was boring him. Sit down, Simone. Brad made a creative financial decision. The pool is for the family. Everyone benefits. Maya can swim in it. Your cousins can swim in it. Why are you so selfish? Selfish, I repeated, feeling like I was in a nightmare. I am selfish because I don't want my daughter's property stolen. Desmond slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. It is just a violin, Simone. Buy her another one. You make plenty of money with that art job of yours. You drive a Mercedes. You live in a penthouse. Why are you counting pennies with your family? Your sister needs this pool. He gestured to Ebony, who was now rubbing her belly dramatically. Look at her, Desmond continued. She is carrying my third grandchild. Her back hurts. Her ankles are swollen. She needs relaxation. She needs support. You are fine. You have always been fine. But you begrudge your sister a little comfort because you are jealous. Jealousy. That was always their excuse. I am not jealous, I said, my voice quiet and steady. I am disgusted. I am disgusted that you think it is okay to rob one grandchild to pamper another. Desmond laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. He cut into his roast beef, not even looking at me anymore. Pamper. That is a funny word coming from you. You have been pampered your whole life with your education and your career. Ebony chose to be a mother. She chose the hardest job in the world. She deserves to be taken care of. I looked around the table. Patricia was smirking. Brad was eating hungrily. Ebony looked triumphant. And my father, my hero, was eating his dinner as if he hadn't just sanctioned a crime. I realized then that it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the pool. It was about something much older. Something that had rotted the foundation of this family for 30 years. Why, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why is she always right, and I am always wrong? Why does she get the pool and I get the bill? Why do you treat us so differently? Desmond stopped chewing. He put his fork down slowly. He picked up his napkin and wiped his mouth. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time that night. His eyes traveled over my face, taking in my dark skin, my broad nose, the features that mirrored his own almost perfectly. Then he looked at Ebony. Ebony sat there, glowing under the chandelier. Her skin was the color of a paper bag, light and creamy, a genetic lottery win from a distant white ancestor on my mother's side. She had soft curls and hazel eyes. She was the standard of beauty my parents worshipped. Desmond leaned back in his chair, and he said the words that would haunt me forever. The words that finally killed the little girl inside me who just wanted her daddy to love her. Look at her, Simone. Look at your sister. She is delicate. She is soft. She has that light complexion that bruises so easily. She needs protection. She was built to be cherished. He turned his cold gaze back to me. But you are like my mother. You are dark. You are built like an ox. You have that thick skin. You are strong. You can take a hit and keep walking. You were built for survival, Simone. You don't need help. You don't need a pool. You can survive anything. So stop crying like a victim when you were born to be a fighter. The room went silent. The air felt sucked out of the space. Colorism. It was the dirty little secret of the black community sitting right there at our dinner table. My father penalized me because I looked like him. He favored Ebony because she looked like what he wished he was. He equated my dark skin with strength, with the ability to endure pain, so he felt no guilt in inflicting it. He equated Ebony's light skin with fragility, with value, so he felt a duty to serve her. My blackness made me a mule in his eyes. Her whiteness made her a princess. I looked at my hands. They were the same color as the earth they were digging up outside. They were beautiful hands, strong hands, hands that had worked hard to build a life. And to him, they were just tools. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped against the floor, a screeching sound that made everyone wince. "You are right, Dad," I said. My voice did not shake. I did not cry. The tears had evaporated, replaced by a clarity so sharp it cut. I am strong. I am a survivor. I am exactly like Great-Grandma Rose. I picked up my purse. And you forgot one thing about Grandma Rose. She is dark, she is strong, and she is the one who owns the checkbook. Desmond frowned, confused. What are you talking about? You said I don't need this family? I continued. You said I can survive alone. So I will. I turned to walk away, but I stopped at the door. I looked back at the tableau of my family. The light-skinned princess, the white manipulator, the colorist father, and the complicit mother. "Enjoy the pool, Dad," I said softly. "I hope the water washes away the shame." But I doubt it. Because unlike dirt, you cannot wash away who you are. I walked out of the house and into the humid Georgia night. I got into my car and locked the doors. I looked at the house one last time. It was big, it was impressive, and it was rotting from the inside out. My father thought my dark skin meant I could handle pain. He was about to find out that it also meant I could deliver punishment. He thought I was a workhorse. He forgot that a workhorse is strong enough to kick down the entire stable. I started the engine. I had my answer. There was no reasoning with them. There was no emotional appeal that would work. They did not see me as a person. They saw me as a resource to be exploited or ignored. So I would stop being a daughter. I would stop being a sister. I would become exactly what they accused me of being. I would become a cold, calculating, ruthless businesswoman. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the private investigator. "Find out where the cello is," I said when he answered. "And then find out everything you can about the mortgage on my parents' house. I want to know who holds the deed. I want to know every debt Brad has. I want to know everything." I drove away from the house where I grew up, leaving behind the girl who wanted approval. The woman driving away wanted only one thing: total, absolute scorched earth victory. The investigation was about to begin. And what I would find would not just get my cello back. It would hand me the keys to their destruction. I sat in my car at the end of the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned the color of ash. I took a breath that shuddered in my chest and dialed 911. My voice was calm when the operator answered. It was the terrifying calm of someone who has nothing left to lose but the truth. I reported a grand larceny in progress. I reported the theft of an antique instrument valued at over $100,000. I gave the address, I gave the names, and then I waited. 10 minutes later, the blue and red lights cut through the humid Georgia darkness. Two squad cars pulled up, their sirens chirping briefly before falling silent. In a neighborhood like Buckhead, silence is a currency, and the police knew better than to make a scene. I stepped out of my car to meet them. Two officers approached me. One was an older man with a tired face, Officer Davis. The other was younger, eager, Officer Miller. I explained the situation clearly. I told them about the cello. I told them about the unauthorized sale. I told them about the admission of guilt I had heard earlier that day. I tried to present myself as the professional woman I was. I stood tall. I kept my voice steady. I needed them to see me as a victim of a crime, not a participant in a domestic squabble. Officer Davis nodded, taking notes in his small pad. "Let us go speak to the homeowners," he said. I followed them to the front door. The door I had walked out of only an hour ago. I expected my parents to be angry. I expected shouting. I expected them to be defensive. I was wrong. I had underestimated their capacity for theater. When the door opened, my mother Patricia was already crying. But these were not tears of guilt. They were tears of terror. She looked at the police officers with wide, trembling eyes, clutching a handkerchief to her chest. "Oh, thank God you are here," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "We were so scared. She has been screaming at us for hours." Ebony was sitting on the sofa, her hands cradling her pregnant belly as if she were protecting her unborn child from a physical assault. She looked up at the officers with big, watery doe eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My blood pressure is already so high. I just want her to leave us alone." I stood there frozen. My mouth opened to speak to defend myself, but Brad stepped forward. He had changed out of his sweaty polo shirt into a crisp button-down and slacks. He looked the picture of a responsible, concerned citizen. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender and peace. "Officers, I am so sorry you had to come out here," Brad said, his voice smooth and apologetic. "We tried to de-escalate the situation ourselves. My sister-in-law, Simone, she is having a very difficult time right now." He gestured toward me with a look of profound pity. "She lost her husband a few years ago, and honestly, she has not been the same since. She gets confused. She gets fixated on things from the past. Today she came over and started demanding we give her an old violin that she claims is worth millions. It is heartbreaking, really." I felt the blood drain from my face. They were doing it. They were painting me as the hysterical, unstable woman. They were weaponizing my grief against me. "That is a lie," I shouted, my composure cracking. "They stole my daughter's cello. It is a Galliano." Brad admitted he sold it to pay for that pool. Officer Davis turned to me, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, please lower your voice." Brad shook his head sadly. "See? This is what we have been dealing with all evening. Officers, the instrument she is talking about was a student cello my wife's parents bought for Simone 20 years ago. It has been sitting in our attic for a decade. We did a spring cleaning and sold some old junk to a second-hand store. We had every right to. It was in our house. It was our property." "No," I protested, stepping forward. "It belongs to the Rosewood Trust." "It was on loan." Patricia let out a wail, burying her face in Brad's shoulder. "She is making things up again. She always does this when she is off her medication. She wants to ruin our family because she is jealous of her sister's baby." Officer Miller looked at me, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. "Ma'am, do you have proof of ownership for this instrument? Do you have a receipt? A certificate of authenticity?" I scrambled for my phone. "I have an appraisal," I said, my fingers shaking as I tried to unlock the screen. "I have the documents." But then I stopped. I realized with a sick, sinking feeling that I did not have them on my phone. The physical appraisal documents, the insurance papers, and the letter from Great-Grandma Rose were all in my safety deposit box at the bank that was currently closed. "It is in my safe deposit box," I stammered. "I can get it tomorrow, but you have to stop them now. You have to arrest him before the trail goes cold." Officer Davis closed his notebook. The sound was final, like a gavel striking wood. "Ma'am, without proof of ownership and considering the item was removed from the residence of your parents who claim it was a gift, we cannot make an arrest. This is not a grand larceny case." I stared at him, unable to comprehend the injustice. What I whispered. "This is a civil matter," Officer Davis said, reciting the line that has failed so many victims before. "It is a dispute between family members over property. We cannot intervene. You will have to take this up in civil court. But he sold it, I pleaded. He admitted it. It is their word against yours, ma'am, the officer said. And right now the property was in their possession. Brad stepped forward again, placing a comforting arm around my mother. We don't want to press charges for harassment, Brad said magnanimously. We just want her to go home and get some rest. We are worried about her mental state. Officer Davis turned to me. Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to leave the property. The homeowners have asked you to leave. If you stay, we will have to arrest you for trespassing. Trespassing. I was being threatened with arrest at the house I grew up in, while the people who robbed my daughter stood there playing the victim. I looked at my mother. She was no longer crying. She was peeking out from behind her handkerchief, watching me with cold, hard eyes. I looked at Ebony. She looked bored. And then I looked at Brad. As the officers turned to walk back to their cars, believing they had diffused a domestic disturbance, Brad lingered in the doorway. He waited until the police were looking away. He waited until I looked directly at him. And then he winked. It was a slow, deliberate wink. A gesture of absolute victory. A gesture that said, I won. I took what was yours. I lied about it, and the law just protected me. What are you going to do about it, Simone? That wink was the mistake. If he had looked ashamed, maybe I would have given up. If he had looked scared, maybe I would have settled. But that wink told me everything I needed to know. This was a game to him. He enjoyed the cruelty. I turned around and walked to my car. I did not look back. I did not argue with the officers. I got in, started the engine, and drove away. Officer Davis thought this was a civil matter. He thought it was over. He had no idea that by walking away I was not retreating. I was simply moving the battlefield to a place where Brad could not hide behind fake tears and lies. They wanted a civil war, fine. I would give them one, but they forgot that in a war you don't just attack the soldiers. You cut off their supply lines, you burn their resources, you leave them with nothing. I drove through the night, the tears finally drying on my face. I was done being the victim. The police had failed me. My parents had betrayed me. It was time to call the one person who hated thieves more than I did. It was time to pay a visit to the woman who actually held the keys to the kingdom. I was going to find the cello. And then I was going to find the mortgage. Brad thought he had liquidated a dead asset. He was about to find out that he was the one who was about to be liquidated. Sunday in Atlanta is not a day of rest. It is a competitive sport. And nowhere is the competition fiercer than at Mount Zion Baptist Church. This was the place where business deals were whispered in the pews between hymns, where social standing was measured by the size of your hat and the seat of your car, and where my family had held court for 3 decades. I drove into the parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my Mercedes. I knew I should not be here. After the humiliation of the police visit, after the betrayal at the dinner table, any sane person would have stayed home. But in our community, absence is an admission of guilt. If I did not show up, I was confirming every lie they were about to tell. If I stayed away, I was the prodigal daughter who had turned her back on God and family. So I parked my car, adjusted my silk dress, and prepared to walk into the lion's den. The air inside the sanctuary was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and old Bibles. The organ was already humming a low vibration that rattled in my chest. As I walked down the center aisle holding Maya's hand, I felt the shift in the atmosphere. Heads turned, fans stopped waving. The whispers started immediately, a soft hiss like steam escaping a pipe. Did you hear? That is her? The one who called the cops on her own mama. Over some old guitar. I kept my head high, my eyes fixed on the stained glass window above the pulpit. I guided Maya to her Sunday school classroom in the basement, kissing her forehead. Be good, baby, I whispered. I will be right upstairs. Maya looked anxious, clinging to my hand for a second too long, before walking into the room where my sister Ebony's children were already holding court. I pushed down the worry rising in my throat and turned back to the sanctuary. I took my seat in the fourth pew, the spot I had occupied since I was a child. My parents and Ebony were in the front row, the tithe payers' row, as it was silently known. They looked the picture of pious suffering. My mother was wearing black, as if she were in mourning. Ebony was rubbing her belly, looking fragile and saintly. Brad was shaking hands with the deacons, playing the role of the devoted son-in-law. The service began with the usual energy, the choir swaying the drums, beating a rhythm that usually brought me peace. But today, every note felt like a judgment. And then Pastor Jenkins took the pulpit. Pastor Jenkins had been golfing with my father for 20 years. He was a man who knew which side of his bread was buttered, and he knew exactly who paid for the new roof on the fellowship hall. He wiped his brow with a handkerchief and looked out over the congregation. His eyes lingered on me for a fraction of a second before he opened his Bible. Today, church, I want to talk about a commandment that is often forgotten in this modern, selfish world, he boomed. Honor thy father and thy mother. I felt my stomach drop. I knew exactly where this was going. He preached for 40 minutes about sacrifice. He spoke about parents who break their backs to build a legacy for their children. He spoke about the sin of ingratitude. He spoke about children who get a little education, make a little money, and think they are better than the stock they came from. There is a sickness in our generation, he shouted, sweat flying, a sickness of greed, a sickness where material possessions are valued more than the blood in our veins. We have children calling the law on their own parents over money. We have daughters forgetting who wiped their tears. The congregation shouted, Amen. I sat frozen, staring straight ahead. I could feel the eyes boring into the back of my neck. I was the sermon. I was the cautionary tale. Then the ambush happened. Pastor Jenkins lowered his voice to a somber whisper. We have a family in pain today, church. A pillar of this community is hurting. Sister Patricia, would you like to share a testimony? My mother stood up slowly. She leaned heavily on Brad's arm as she walked to the microphone, acting as if she could barely support her own weight. She took the mic, her hand trembling theatrically. I just want to ask for prayer, she said, her voice cracking perfectly. My husband and I, we are getting older. Our bodies are tired. We decided to build a pool in our backyard. Not for us, but for our grandchildren. For Ebony's babies to learn to swim. For the family to gather. She paused to wipe a dry eye. We had some old things in the attic. Junk, really. We sold it to pay for the construction. We thought we were doing a good thing. But my oldest daughter, she stopped looking down at me in the fourth pew. The entire church turned to look at me. The judgment was heavy, suffocating. She called the police on us. Patricia sobbed. She brought officers to our door. Over an old wooden instrument. She yelled at her father. She terrified her pregnant sister. She chose a piece of wood over her own flesh and blood. The church erupted in gasps. I heard a woman behind me mutter, Lord have mercy, that girl has a spirit of Jezebel on her. Patricia continued, gaining strength from the crowd's reaction. I forgive her, she proclaimed, looking up toward heaven. I pray for her heart to soften. I pray she finds peace. But it hurts, church. It hurts to be treated like a criminal by the child you nursed. Brad patted her back, looking solemn. Ebony wiped a tear. It was a masterclass in manipulation. They had taken my victimization and turned it into their martyrdom. They had used the holiest place in our community to assassinate my character. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream that they were liars, that the junk was a masterpiece, that the pool was funded by theft. But I knew that in this room the truth did not matter. The narrative had already been set. If I shouted, I was the crazy, angry woman they described. If I walked out, I was running from the truth. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I sat there. I kept my face completely blank. I did not cry. I did not frown. I looked at my mother with a calm, steady gaze until she finally looked away. I refused to give them the reaction they craved. When the service finally ended, I did not stay for fellowship. I did not shake hands. I walked straight to the basement to get my daughter. I just wanted to get out of there. I wanted to take a shower and wash the hypocrisy off my skin. But when I got to the classroom door, I stopped. The room was empty except for Maya and the Sunday school teacher, Sister Johnson, who was busy tidying up books and ignoring the child in the corner. Maya was sitting on a small plastic chair, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Maya," I called out. She looked up and my heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. Her face was puffy and red. Her braids were messy as if someone had pulled them. "Mommy," she choked out. I rushed over and knelt in front of her. "What happened? Who did this?" Maya hiccuped, trying to catch her breath. "It was Michael and Sarah," she said, naming Ebony's children. "They told everyone in class that you are going to hell. They said you tried to send Granddaddy to jail. They said we are poor now because you are greedy. They said—" She stopped, fresh tears spilling over. "What did they say, baby?" "They said I don't deserve the cello anyway, because I am ugly and I play bad. They said Grandma sold it because she hates listening to me." I felt a roar build up in my chest, a primal sound that I had to bite my tongue to suppress. They had not just attacked me. They had weaponized their children to attack my child. They had taken a pure, beautiful talent and twisted it into something shameful. Sister Johnson walked over looking annoyed rather than concerned. "The kids were just having a little disagreement, Simone," she said dismissively. "Maya is being a little sensitive today. Maybe you should talk to her about not lying about her grandparents." I stood up slowly, towering over the woman. "My daughter does not lie," I said, my voice dropping to a register that made Sister Johnson take a step back. "And if I hear that you allowed bullying in this classroom again, I will not call the deacon. I will call the state licensing board for childcare." I grabbed Maya's hand and marched her out to the car. We sat in the silence of the parking lot for a long time. The air conditioning blasted, drying the sweat on my skin, but it could not cool the fire in my veins. Maya looked at me, her eyes swollen. "Mommy," she whispered. "Yes, baby, I don't want the cello back." I turned to look at her, shocked. "What, I don't want it," she said, her voice trembling. "If it makes Grandma and Grandpa hate us, I don't want it. Let them keep the pool. I don't want to play anymore. I just want them to stop being mean to you." Those words hit me harder than any sermon. My daughter was willing to give up her gift, her passion, her legacy just to protect me. She was willing to make herself small so that my parents would stop hurting us. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. It was not a break. It was a realignment. For the last 3 days, I had been trying to be civil. I had been trying to get my property back while keeping the family intact. I had been worried about Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas cards. I had been playing by the rules of engagement for a family that loved each other. But we were not a family. We were a war zone. And my parents were not peacekeeping forces. They were terrorists who held my daughter's happiness hostage. I looked at Maya. I reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek. "You are going to play again, Maya," I said. "And you are not going to give up anything." I started the car. I didn't drive home. I drove toward the highway. "Where are we going?" Maya asked. "We are going to visit Great-Grandma Rose," I said. "But she is at the nursing home," Maya said. "I know," I replied. "And she is the only person in this world who hates thieves more than I do." I pulled out of the church parking lot, leaving behind the judgment, the lies, and the fake prayers. I was done with the New Testament turn the other cheek approach. It was time for some Old Testament justice. Fire and brimstone. My parents wanted to talk about honor fine. I was going to show them exactly what happens when you dishonor a contract with the matriarch of the Rosewood family. Maya stopped crying as she saw the look on my face. She saw the shift. She saw the moment her mother stopped being a victim and started being a soldier. Brad had winked at me. My father had dismissed me. My mother had slandered me. But they had all forgotten one thing. The cello did not belong to them. And neither did the house they were sleeping in. The road ahead was clear. I wasn't just going to get the cello back. I was going to take the roof over their heads. I was going to take the ground beneath their feet. I was going to make sure that the next time they entered a church they would be on their knees praying for mercy, because I was certainly not going to give them any. I pressed the accelerator. The Mercedes surged forward. The time for talking was over. The time for eviction had begun. I did not go home after leaving the church. I drove straight to a nondescript office building in downtown Atlanta, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and a smell of stale coffee. This was the office of Marcus Thorne, a private investigator who specialized in forensic accounting. I had used him before for background checks on potential employees at the gallery, but today I was hiring him to audit my own family. I sat across from his metal desk, my hands folded on my lap. I told him everything. I gave him Brad's full name, his license plate number, and the few details I knew about his so-called real estate business. "Find the money, Marcus," I said. "Find out where he got the cash for that pool, and find out where he sold the cello." Marcus typed away on his computer, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. He worked in silence for 20 minutes while I paced the small room. Finally, he stopped typing. He let out a low whistle. "You are not going to like this, Simone," he said, turning the monitor toward me. I looked at the screen. It was a chaotic web of bank transfers, gambling sites, and pawn shop records. "First the cello," Marcus said, pointing to a line item. "Your brother-in-law didn't sell it to a collector. He didn't sell it to a school. He pawned it." "Pawned it?" I asked, leaning closer. "He took it to a place called Gold and Glory on the south side. It is a high-end pawn shop that moves stolen goods without asking questions. And here is the kicker. He didn't get $100,000. He didn't even get 50. "How much?" I whispered. 15,000, Marcus said. "Cash." I felt the blood drain from my face. $15,000. He had sold a $185,000 masterpiece for the price of a used Honda Civic. He had traded a legacy for pocket change. "But wait," I said, my mind racing. "If he only got 15,000, how is he paying for the pool? That excavation alone costs 20 grand. The total project is easily 80,000. Marcus clicked on another window. This one showed a property deed. "This is where it gets ugly," he said. "Brad didn't use the cello money for the pool. He used the cello money to pay off a gambling debt to a bookie in Las Vegas. He has been betting on college football and losing big time." "Then where did the pool money come from?" I asked. Marcus sighed and handed me a printed document. "He took out a second mortgage on your parents' house." I stared at the paper. It was a home equity line of credit for $100,000. The signatures at the bottom were Desmond and Patricia Rosewood. "My parents would never agree to this," I said. "They are terrified of debt. They paid off their mortgage 10 years ago. They think debt is a sin." "Look closer at the signatures," Marcus said. I squinted. The handwriting was shaky. It looked like my father's signature, but slightly off. The loops were too wide. The pressure was too hard. "He forged them?" I asked, horrified. "He forged them," Marcus confirmed. "Or he tricked them into signing a digital document they didn't understand. Either way, the bank released the funds to a joint account Brad manages for them. He took the 100 grand, paid the pool contractor 30, and the rest, well, the rest is sitting in his personal offshore account in the Caymans." The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. Brad hadn't just stolen the cello, he had stolen the equity in my parents' home. He had put them back in debt in their 60s. He was actively looting the family estate while they fed him pot roast and praised him as the son they never had. I stood up, my legs shaking. "I need that cello back," I said. "Now." I drove to the south side of the city, to a neighborhood where the storefronts had bars on the windows and the streetlights were broken. Gold and Glory Pawn Shop was a fortress of concrete and neon. I walked in, the bell above the door announcing my arrival. The man behind the counter was thick-necked and bald, wearing enough gold chains to anchor a ship. He looked me up and down, assessing my silk blouse and designer purse. "We are closed for appraisals, lady," he grunted. "I am not here to sell," I said, walking up to the glass case. "I am here to buy. You took in a cello 3 days ago from a man named Brad." The man's eyes narrowed. "I don't know any Brad. And we don't give out client information. Confidentiality." I reached into my purse and pulled out a stack of cash I had withdrawn from the emergency fund at the bank on my way over. $10,000 in crisp $100 bills. I slammed it on the counter. I am not the police, I said, my voice hard. I don't care about your client. I care about the instrument. It is a Giuseppe Galliano, and if you don't sell it to me right now, I will come back with the police, and they will want to look at your entire inventory, not just the cello. Do you want the heat, or do you want the money? The man looked at the cash. He looked at me. He saw that I wasn't bluffing. It will cost you 25, he said. I have a buyer lined up in Tokyo who is willing to pay $25,000 to buy back my own property. I didn't blink. Fine, I said. I wrote a personal check for the remaining 15,000. He verified it, then disappeared into the back room. Moments later, he emerged carrying the black hard shell case. My heart stopped. I motioned for him to open it. He unlatched the clasps and lifted the lid. There it was. The rich amber wood gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. The curves were perfect. The smell of old varnish and history wafted up to me. I ran my hand over the neck. It was unharmed. I closed the case and locked it. I took the receipt he handed me. I need you to write down exactly who brought this in, I said. On the receipt. The man hesitated, then scribbled Brad's description and the date on the back of the receipt. Pleasure doing business with you, he sneered. I walked out of that pawn shop carrying $25,000 worth of debt and a priceless instrument. But I also carried something else. I had the receipt. I had the paper trail. I had the proof that Brad had sold a family heirloom for quick cash. I put the cello in the trunk of my car and covered it with a blanket. Then I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the documents Marcus had given me. The forged mortgage, the gambling debts, the pawn shop receipt. My parents thought they were getting a pool. They thought they were getting a luxury lifestyle. They had no idea they were sitting on a financial sinkhole that was about to swallow their entire retirement. I could have gone to them right then. I could have shown them the papers. I could have screamed, "Look what your golden boy did." But I knew them. They would deny it. They would say I forged the papers. They would say Brad had a plan. They would find a way to blame me. No. I needed more than just paper. I needed a confession. I needed them to hear it from his own mouth. I started the car. I wasn't going to my parents' house. I was going home to prepare. Because in 2 days my parents were hosting the grand opening party for the pool. Everyone would be there. The pastor, the neighbors, the family. It was the perfect stage. Brad wanted to be the center of attention. I was going to make sure all eyes were on him. I drove home with a cold determination. I had the evidence. Now I just needed the execution. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the mouse to walk in and grab the cheese. And Brad? He was a very greedy mouse. The drive from the pawn shop to the climate-controlled storage facility was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I had the cello in the trunk wrapped in blankets like a rescued hostage, but my heart was still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I secured a unit on the 3rd floor, a windowless steel room that smelled of dust and silence. I placed the Galliano in the far corner, elevated on a pallet to protect it from any potential moisture. I locked the door with a heavy-duty padlock, checking it 3 times before I walked away. For the first time in days, Maya's legacy was safe. But the war for my family's soul was just entering its most dangerous phase. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the storage facility and stared at my phone. The screen glowed in the darkness, a portal to the people who had betrayed me. I knew what I had to do next. It went against every fiber of my being. It went against my pride, my dignity, and my rage. But to catch a predator, you cannot run at him screaming. You have to play dead. You have to make him think he has already won, so he lowers his guard and exposes his throat. I opened the text thread with my mother. My fingers hovered over the keypad, trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, swallowed the bile rising in my throat, and typed the lie that would seal their fate. Mom, Dad, I am sorry. I have been thinking about what Pastor Jenkins said. I let my emotions get the best of me. The cello was just a thing and family is more important. I should not have called the police. I hope you can forgive me. I just want us to be at peace for the pool party. I hit send. I felt physically ill. I wanted to throw the phone out the window. But I waited. The response came 3 minutes later. It was from my father. We are glad you finally came to your senses, Simone. We raised you better than that. We forgive you. We will see you at the party. There was no apology from them, no admission of the pain they caused, just a smug acceptance of my surrender. They thought they had broken me. They thought the lecture at the church had worked. Perfect. Now came the second part of the plan. The Trojan horse. The next afternoon I drove to my parents' house. I did not go empty-handed. I stopped at a high-end gourmet market and bought a basket filled with expensive wines, imported cheeses, and truffles. It was a peace offering, fit for royalty, or in this case, for two narcissists and their parasitic son-in-law. When I pulled into the driveway, the construction crew was gone. The pool was filled with water shimmering bright blue under the Georgia sun. It looked inviting, expensive, and completely out of place in the backyard that used to be a garden. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Brad answered. Of course he did. He was always there now, guarding the gate like a troll under a bridge. He looked at the basket in my hands, then at my face. He smirked, leaning against the doorframe with crossed arms. Crawling back, huh? He asked. I forced a smile. It felt like stretching rubber over a skull. I just wanted to apologize in person, Brad. I brought this for the family. He stepped aside, allowing me to enter. Patricia and Desmond are in the living room, he said, grabbing the heavy basket from my hands before I could protest. I will take this. I walked into the living room. My parents were sitting on the sofa watching a game show. They looked up as I entered, their expressions guarded. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Simone. My mother said, muting the television. She patted the spot next to her, a gesture of benevolence. Come sit. I sat. For the next hour, I played the role of the chastised daughter. I nodded as my father lectured me about financial priorities. I listened as my mother talked about how stressful the police visit had been for her nerves. I agreed when they said that Brad was a visionary for increasing the property value. I ate my slice of humble pie and I asked for seconds. But while my mouth was apologizing, my eyes were scanning the room. I needed a place to plant the device. I had purchased a high-end digital voice recorder, the kind used by journalists, which could record for 48 hours straight. It was small, black, and easily concealable. I had it tucked into the sleeve of my cardigan. I need to use the restroom, I said during a lull in the conversation. I stood up and walked toward the hallway, but I paused by the large decorative plant stand near the liquor cabinet. This was Brad's favorite spot. He always poured himself a drink here before dinner, and he often took his phone calls in this corner away from the television. I pretended to stumble slightly, reaching out to steady myself on the plant stand. In one fluid motion, I slipped the recorder out of my sleeve and dropped it into the dense foliage of the artificial fern. It landed silently on the moss at the base of the pot, completely hidden by the leaves. Careful there, Brad called out from the kitchen. Don't knock over the decor. I am fine, I called back. Just tripped. I went to the bathroom, washed my hands, and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were cold. The trap was set. I returned to the living room, said my goodbyes, and promised to be early for the party on Saturday. As I walked out the door, Brad gave me a pat on the back that was a little too hard. Glad you are back on the team, Simone, he said. We have big things coming up. Big things. I drove to a coffee shop 2 blocks away. I couldn't listen to the feed live, but I knew exactly what was about to happen. By playing the submissive daughter, I had removed the threat. Brad would feel safe, and when a con man feels safe, he gets greedy. I was right. 2 days later, I retrieved the device during a quick drop-by to help set up decorations for the party. I took it home and plugged it into my computer. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and began to sift through hours of silence and television noise. And then I found it. The timestamp was the evening after my apology visit. The audio was crystal clear. I heard the clinking of glass. Brad was pouring a drink. Then I heard the rustling of papers. Mom. Dad Brad's voice came through the speakers. Since Simone is back on board and the pool is finished, we need to think about the future. I have been looking at the estate planning. My father's voice rumbled. What about it, son? Well, honestly, Desmond, the tax situation is a mess, Brad said. You guys are sitting on a lot of equity, and the government is going to take a huge chunk of it if anything happens to you. Plus, with Simone being unstable, we need to protect the assets. I leaned closer to the computer screen. He was pivoting to the kill. What do you suggest? Patricia asked. I had my lawyer draw up a revocable living trust, Brad lied. It puts the house and the remaining accounts under a centralized management structure. I would act as the trustee just to handle the paperwork and the day-to-day investments. You two would still own everything, of course. It just gives me the power to move money around quickly to avoid taxes and maximize returns. It is called tax optimization. All the wealthy families in Buckhead do it. There was a silence. I could hear papers being shuffled. Power of attorney for assets, my father asked, sounding hesitant. That is a lot of power, Brad. It is just a formality, Desmond Brad said smoothly. Look, you saw how crazy Simone got over a wooden box. Imagine if she got control of your bank accounts. She would freeze everything. She would ruin the retirement you worked so hard for. This protects you from her, and it lets me grow your wealth so you can leave a legacy for Ebony's kids. The mention of Ebony's kids was the magic key. And you are sure this is safe? My mother asked. Patricia, I built you that pool, didn't I? Brad said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Have I ever steered you wrong? I am doing this for free. I am family. I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. Okay, my father said. Okay, my mother echoed. I closed my eyes. They had just signed it. They had signed a power of attorney giving Brad full control over their finances. They thought they were protecting themselves from me. In reality, they had just handed the fox the keys to the hen house. But the recording wasn't over. I fast-forwarded an hour. I heard my parents say goodnight and go upstairs to bed. I heard the house go quiet. Then I heard the sound of a phone dialing. Brad was making a call. Yo, Mike. Brad's voice rang out. It was different now. The respectful son-in-law tone was gone, replaced by a sneering, arrogant drawl. Yeah, it is done. The old fools signed it. Yeah, everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the whole portfolio. He laughed, the sound of ice clinking in his glass. Man, it was so easy. I just scared them about their crazy daughter and threw around some big tax words. They ate it up. They are so desperate to look rich, they don't even read what they are signing. He paused, listening to the person on the other end. Yeah, as soon as the ink dries, I am taking out a second line of credit. I'm going to pay you back, don't worry. I just need to move some funds around. These people are my golden goose man. Then he said the words that would ensure he never walked freely in Atlanta again. I can't wait to dump this place. Once I drain the accounts, I am out. Ebony is getting annoying with the pregnancy whining, and her parents are just, God, they are so old and slow. It is like living in a nursing home, but hey, 70 years of savings is worth a few months of pretending to like their dry pot roast. The call ended. I heard Brad sigh, a sound of deep satisfaction. Final score, Brad 1, everyone else 0. I took off my headphones. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. They were trembling with adrenaline. I had him. I had him on tape admitting to fraud, elder abuse, and premeditated theft. I had him mocking the very people he claimed to love. I had him calling my parents old fools and my sister annoying. I looked at the digital file on my screen. It was a weapon of mass destruction. Brad thought the score was 1-0. He thought the game was over. He didn't realize that the game hadn't even started. I copied the file to a USB drive, then I copied it to the cloud, then I emailed it to myself. Tomorrow was the pool party, the grand unveiling, the moment Brad had been waiting for to show off his success to the world. He wanted an audience. I was going to give him one. I stood up and poured myself a glass of the same wine I had brought to my parents' house. I swirled the dark liquid in the glass. "Cheers, Brad," I whispered to the empty room. "Enjoy your victory lap. Because you are about to hit a wall at 100 miles an hour." I went to my closet and picked out my outfit for the party. A sharp, tailored white suit. The color of mourning in some cultures, the color of purity in others. For me, it was the color of a blank slate. The apology was fake, the surrender was a lie, but the reckoning. The reckoning was going to be very, very real. The Heritage at Buckhead is not a nursing home. It is a 5-star resort where the wealthy go to age gracefully, surrounded by marble floors, fresh lilies, and staff members who speak in hushed, deferential tones. It costs $12,000 a month to live there, and every penny of it comes from the Rosewood Family Trust. I walked through the automatic glass doors, the heels of my white suit clicking rhythmically against the polished stone. I did not stop at the front desk. I knew exactly where she would be. At 2 in the afternoon, Great-Grandma Rose was always in the solarium. I found her sitting at a small wrought iron table by the window, bathed in the afternoon sun. At 90 years old, Rose Rosewood was still a force of nature. She sat with a posture that would shame a ballerina. She was wearing a Chanel tweed jacket, her silver hair pulled back into an elegant chignon, and her fingers adorned with a single emerald ring hovered over a chessboard. Across from her sat Mr. Henderson, a retired judge who was 20 years her junior. He looked sweaty and nervous. "Checkmate," Arthur Rose said softly, moving her queen with a decisive click. "You left your flank exposed again. You are too aggressive. You forget to protect your king." Mr. Henderson sighed, toppling his king in surrender. "You are brutal today, Rose." Rose did not smile. She simply began resetting the board. "I am not brutal, Arthur. I am precise. There is a difference." She looked up, then her dark eyes locking onto mine. She did not look surprised to see me. She scanned my face, then my white suit, then the thick leather portfolio clutched in my hand. "Hello, Simone," she said. "You look like you are going to a funeral. Or perhaps you are the one performing the execution." I stepped forward. "Hello, Grandma. Can we talk alone?" Rose nodded to Mr. Henderson. "Run along, Arthur. Go take your afternoon nap." My great-granddaughter has that look in her eye. The one that usually costs someone a lot of money. Mr. Henderson scrambled away. I sat in his chair. The chessboard sat between us, a battlefield of black and white. I did not ask how she was. I did not make small talk about the weather. I placed the portfolio on the table. "They sold the Galliano," I said. Rose's hand paused in mid-air, holding a pawn. She placed it down slowly. "I assumed as much when you called the police 3 days ago. News travels fast in this town, Simone. Especially bad news." She looked at me, waiting. "I know you think this is just family drama," I continued. "I know you think I should just let it go, but it is not just the cello anymore." I opened the portfolio. I took out the first piece of paper, the receipt from the pawn shop. Brad pawned it for $15,000 to a fence in South Atlanta. He used the money to pay off a gambling debt. I bought it back. It is safe in storage. Rose picked up the receipt. She put on her reading glasses, examining the paper as if it were a legal brief. 15,000, she murmured, an insult to the craftsman. I took out the second document, the mortgage papers, but he told Mom and Dad he sold it for 100,000 to build the pool. He lied. To get the money for the construction, he forged their signatures on a home equity line of credit. He leveraged the house, Grandma, the house that belongs to the trust. Rose's eyes narrowed. The temperature in the sunny room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He put a lien on my property. Yes. And 3 days ago he convinced them to sign a power of attorney, giving him full control over their liquid assets. He told them it was for tax optimization. I pulled out a small speaker from my bag. I connected it to my phone. But I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to hear what he thinks of the Rosewood legacy. I pressed play. The recording was crisp. Brad's voice filled the space between us, echoing off the glass walls of the solarium. The old fools signed it. Yeah, everything. I can't wait to dump this place. They are so old and slow. It is like living in a nursing home. I watched Rose's face as she listened. She did not gasp. She did not frown. She sat completely still like a statue carved from obsidian. But I saw her hand. Her right hand resting on the table slowly curled into a fist. The emerald ring caught the light flashing like a warning signal. When the recording ended, silence rushed back into the room. Rose took off her glasses. She folded them deliberately and placed them in her case. She looked out the window at the manicured gardens of the nursing home. Old fools, she repeated softly. She turned back to me. He called my son an old fool. And he is right. I was startled. What Desmond is a fool, Rose said, her voice devoid of emotion. I raised him to be a prince. I gave him everything. I shielded him from the harshness of the world because his father died so young. I wanted him to be happy. But in doing so, I made him weak. I made him vain. He cares more about how things look than what they are. That is why he let a snake like Brad into his house. Because Brad tells him he is a king while robbing him of his crown. She looked at the chessboard. You cannot win if you do not protect your king, Simone. But sometimes the king is the problem. Sometimes the king is willing to burn down the kingdom just to keep his throne. She reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek black phone. She dialed a number from memory. She put it on speaker. Sterling, she said when the line connected. Yes, Mrs. Rosewood? The voice on the other end was clipped efficient. It was Harrison Sterling, the family attorney who terrified grown men. I need you to prepare an eviction notice, Rose said. For a tenant, Sterling asked. For my son, Rose replied. And his wife. And the parasites living in their guest wing. There was a pause on the line. Even Sterling was surprised. Mrs. Rosewood evicting Desmond. That is a drastic measure. The optics will be challenging. I do not care about optics, Sterling Rose said, her voice turning hard as diamond. They sold the Galliano, and they allowed an unauthorized lien to be placed on the trust property. They have breached the covenant of their residency. Understood, Sterling said, his tone shifting to professional predator. I can have the papers ready by tomorrow. Good. And Sterling, I want you to come with me. I want to deliver it personally. You want to go to the house? Sterling asked. Yes, they are having a party on Saturday, a pool party, to celebrate their new wealth. Rose looked at me, a small, terrifying smile playing on her lips. It seems fitting. If they like water so much, let us see how well they swim when I pull the plug. She hung up the phone. She looked at the papers on the table. She picked up the pawn shop receipt and handed it back to me. Keep this safe, she said. It is your proof of purchase. Technically, you own that instrument now. The trust has been reimbursed. She picked up the mortgage fraud documents. I will keep these. Sterling will need them for the criminal referral. Criminal? I asked. You are going to send Brad to jail. Rose stood up. She smoothed her tweed jacket. She looked taller than her 5 feet. Brad is a thief, Simone. Thieves belong in cages. But Desmond is something worse. He is a coward who betrayed his own blood for a swimming pool. She walked over to the chessboard. She picked up the Black King and held it in her palm. When Desmond was 10 years old, he stole $5 from my purse to buy candy. I caught him. I should have made him work it off. I should have made him apologize. Instead, I gave him another $5 and told him to be careful next time. I thought I was being kind. She dropped the king back onto the board. It made a loud clack, toppling over. I taught him that there are no consequences for taking what isn't yours. I taught him that his mother would always pay the bill. Well, I am 90 years old, Simone. I am tired of paying the bill. She turned to me, her eyes blazing with a fire that decades hadn't dimmed. Go home, Simone. Put on your best dress for Saturday. Stand tall. You have done the work. You gathered the evidence. You protected the legacy. Now let me do what I should have done 40 years ago. What is that, I asked. I am going to stop being his mother, Rose said, and I am going to start being his landlord. She turned and walked out of the solarium, moving with the purposeful stride of a general marching to the front lines. I watched her go. I looked down at the fallen king on the chessboard. Desmond had spent his whole life thinking he was the ruler of his domain. He didn't realize he was just a piece on the board, and the Grandmaster had just decided to clear the table. I packed up my papers. My hands were steady now. The guilt was gone. The hesitation was gone. Saturday was coming, and it wasn't going to be a party. It was going to be a massacre, and I had front row seats. Saturday arrived with a sky so blue it looked painted. It was the kind of perfect Georgia afternoon that usually signals a wedding or a coronation. In my parents' backyard, it was a little bit of both. The air was thick with the smell of hickory smoke from the catering truck and the cloying scent of expensive perfume. The DJ was playing a smooth jazz cover of a pop song, the volume set just low enough to allow for gossip, but loud enough to drown out the voice of conscience. I stood by the patio door in my white suit. I held a glass of sparkling water watching the spectacle. My parents had invited everyone, the deacon board from the church, the neighbors they had been competing with for 20 years, my mother's bridge club. Even a few of Brad's sketchy friends from the gym were there looking uncomfortable in their dress shirts. The pool was the centerpiece. It shimmered in the sunlight, a turquoise jewel surrounded by imported Italian tile. It was beautiful. It was expensive. And it was completely illegal. Brad was in his element. He was wearing a white linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest and sunglasses that cost more than my first car. He held a scotch in one hand and a cigar in the other, holding court near the deep end. I could hear him from where I stood. Real estate is all about vision, he was telling a group of admiring uncles. You have to see the value where others see dirt. I told Desmond we are sitting on a gold mine. We just need to extract the equity. It is complex financial structuring, but that is what I do. I watched my father Desmond. He was standing next to Brad, nodding along. He looked proud. For the first time in years, he felt like the patriarch of a successful dynasty. He had the pool, he had the son-in-law who handled the money, he had the admiration of his peers. He had no idea that the scotch in his hand was paid for with a loan against his own bedroom. My mother Patricia was fluttering around the guests like a hummingbird in a floral dress. She was pointing out the features of the pool, the waterfall, the underwater lighting. It is a saltwater system, she bragged to Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who had looked down on us for years. Much better for the skin. We wanted the best for the grandchildren. Ebony was sitting on a chaise lounge, her feet up, accepting compliments on her pregnancy. She looked at me once, gave a little smirk, and turned back to her friends. In their minds, I was the defeated villain. I was the sour spinster in the white suit who had tried to ruin their fun but had ultimately bent the knee. I checked my watch. 2:15. The invitation for the special guest said 2:30. But Great-Grandma Rose was never late. In fact, she believed that arriving early was the only way to catch people showing their true colors. I took a sip of my water. The ice was melting. The trap was set. The mouse was eating the cheese and he was savoring every bite. Brad raised his glass for a toast. Everyone, he shouted. If I could have your attention. The music stopped. The guests turned toward him. I just want to thank Desmond and Patricia, he said, his voice booming, for trusting me with their vision. This pool isn't just water. It is a symbol. It is a symbol of the Rosewood legacy. It is a symbol of prosperity. To family. To family, the crowd cheered. I raised my glass, but I did not drink. I looked toward the driveway. At that exact moment, the sound of tires crunching on gravel cut through the applause. It wasn't the sound of a normal car. It was the heavy, authoritative hum of a 12-cylinder engine. Heads turned. The long, winding driveway was visible from the backyard, and gliding down it like a black shark was a Rolls-Royce Phantom. It was a vintage model, pristine and terrifyingly elegant. It was the car my great-grandfather had bought in 1960, the car that was only taken out for weddings, funerals, and war. The car stopped right at the edge of the patio, blocking the catering van. The driver, a man who had worked for Rose for 40 years, stepped out and walked around to the back door. The silence in the backyard was absolute. The birds stopped singing. The ice stopped clinking. Even Brad lowered his cigar. The driver opened the door. First came the cane. It was made of ebony wood with a silver handle in the shape of a lion's head. It struck the pavement with a sharp click. Then Rose Rosewood emerged. She was wearing a black dress suit with a string of pearls that were real enough to buy the entire neighborhood. She wore a wide-brimmed hat that shaded her eyes, but even in the shadow her gaze was piercing. She stood up straight, defying her 90 years, and looked at the crowd with an expression of mild distaste. Behind her, from the other side of the car, stepped Harrison Sterling. If Rose was the general, Sterling was the executioner. He was a tall, thin white man with a face like a blade. He carried a thick leather briefcase and wore a suit that cost more than Brad's entire imaginary portfolio. He did not look at the guests. He looked at the house. He looked at the pool. He took out a pen and made a note on a legal pad. A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone knew Rose. She was the matriarch. She was the money. But she never left the estate. Her presence here was an event. My mother recovered first. Her face lit up with a desperate, frantic joy. She thought this was the crowning moment. She thought Rose had come to bless the pool. Mama Patricia cried out, her voice shrill. She rushed forward, her floral dress billowing. She reached out to hug Rose, but stopped a foot away when Rose did not raise her arms. "Oh, I am so glad you came," Patricia gushed, pivoting to address the crowd. "Everyone look great. Grandma Rose is here to celebrate with us." She turned back to Rose, gesturing wildly at the water. "Look, Mama, look what we built. It is magnificent, isn't it? We did it for the family. We wanted to honor the property." Brad managed the whole thing. Rose did not look at the pool. She looked at Patricia. Her face was unreadable, a mask of stone. My father Desmond walked up slowly. He looked less confident than his wife. He saw Sterling standing there with the briefcase, and the color began to drain from his face. He knew what Sterling represented. Sterling was the lawyer you called when you were writing someone out of the will, not when you were having a barbecue. "Hello, Mother," Desmond said, his voice tight. "This is a surprise." Brad, sensing the tension, but too stupid to understand the danger, decided to charm his way through it. He swaggered over, extending a hand to Rose. "Grandma Rose," he boomed. "So good to see you. I was just telling everyone about the equity leverage we used to." Rose did not shake his hand. She did not even look at him. She lifted her cane and pointed it at the finest seat on the patio, a large wicker throne with plush cushions that had been reserved for the pastor. "Move," she said. The single word cracked like a whip. Pastor Jenkins jumped up as if the chair was on fire. "Of course, Sister Rose, of course," he stammered. Rose walked past my mother, past my father, and past Brad. She sat down in the chair, adjusting her skirt. She placed both hands on the head of her cane and surveyed the silent party. Sterling came and stood behind her right shoulder like a sentinel. The guests were frozen. They were holding burgers that were getting cold and drinks that were getting warm. They sensed that the party was over, but they were too terrified to leave. They were witnessing a car crash, and they couldn't look away. Patricia tried again, her smile trembling. "Mama, can I get you a plate? The catering is wonderful. Or maybe some punch." Rose looked at her daughter-in-law. "I am not hungry, Patricia." Then, why did you come?" Patricia asked, her voice wavering. "Did you come to see the pool?" Rose finally looked at the water. She looked at the blue expanse that had cost her great-granddaughter a legacy. She looked at the tiles paid for with fraud. "No," Rose said clearly, her voice carrying to the back of the yard. I have seen swimming pools before. They are nothing special. She turned her gaze back to my parents. Her eyes were hard dark and utterly unforgiving. I did not come to see the renovation, Desmond. She paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. I came to watch you pack. A gasp went through the crowd. My mother put a hand to her throat. My father took a step back. Pack, Desmond whispered. What do you mean, pack? Rose nodded to Sterling. Read it, Harrison. Sterling stepped forward. He opened his briefcase with a sharp snap that sounded like a gunshot. He pulled out a sheaf of documents with a red seal at the top. He cleared his throat. Mr. Desmond Rosewood and Mrs. Patricia Rosewood. He began, his voice dry and professional. As of this morning, the Rosewood Family Trust has exercised its right to revoke your residency privileges at the property located at 450 Tuxedo Road, pursuant to Article 7, Section 3 of the Trust Agreement. Revoke? Brad shouted, laughing nervously. What are you talking about? You can't revoke their house. They own this place. Sterling looked at Brad over the rim of his glasses. Incorrect. The trust owns this place. Mr. and Mrs. Rosewood were merely tenants at will. A condition of their tenancy was the preservation of all trust assets located within the domicile. Sterling turned a page. Specifically, the preservation of one Giuseppe Galliano cello dated 1780. The crowd murmured. The word cello rippled through the backyard. By selling said asset without authorization, and by further attempting to encumber the property with a fraudulent mortgage lien, the tenants are in material breach of contract. Fraudulent mortgage, someone whispered. Yes, Sterling continued, his voice getting louder. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in the sheriff's department executing a forcible removal. My mother's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair, sobbing. No, she wailed. This is my house. You can't do this. Mama, tell him to stop. Rose did not blink. I cannot tell him to stop, Patricia. I am the one who told him to start. Desmond looked at his mother. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing. Mother, please, he begged. We can fix this. It was a misunderstanding. Brad said. Rose slammed her cane onto the patio tiles. The sound silenced him instantly. Do not speak to me about what Brad said, she hissed. You are 60 years old, Desmond. You let a stranger walk into my house, steal my property, and mortgage my land. And you stood there and smiled because he bought you a swimming pool. She stood up slowly. She pointed the cane at Brad. And as for you, she said. Brad was sweating now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the desperate look of a rat in a trap. Now wait a minute, Brad stammered. I have power of attorney. They signed it. I control the assets. Sterling smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Actually, Mr. Bradley. That brings us to the second document. He pulled out another paper. Since the house belongs to the trust, the signatures of Desmond and Patricia on the mortgage documents are invalid. They cannot mortgage what they do not own. Therefore, the bank has been notified of the fraud. Fraud? Brad squeaked. Federal bank fraud, Sterling corrected. Wire fraud. And elder abuse. The bank is pressing charges. And since you are the one who facilitated the transaction and received the funds, Sterling pointed toward the side of the house. The gentleman waiting in the driveway would like a word with you. 2 police officers stepped around the corner of the house. They were not the neighborhood patrol. They were detectives. One of them was holding a pair of handcuffs. Brad looked at the cops. He looked at the pool. He looked at Ebony. Ebony, baby, tell them, he shouted. Tell them we did this for the family. Ebony stared at him. She looked at the handcuffs glinting in the sun. She looked at her parents weeping. She looked at Rose standing like a statue of judgment. And then she looked at me. I was still standing by the door, sipping my water. I raised my glass to her. Ebony looked back at Brad. I don't know what you are talking about, she said coldly. I didn't sign anything. Brad's face crumpled. You witch, he screamed. The officers grabbed him. The party erupted into chaos. Rose sat back down in her chair. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at me across the patio and gave a barely perceptible nod. The pool party was over. The eviction party had just begun. The silence that descended upon the backyard was heavy and absolute. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the water in the swimming pool, the very object that had caused this catastrophe. Harrison Sterling stood in the center of the patio like a grim reaper in a bespoke suit. He adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles and looked down at the documents in his hand with the detached precision of a surgeon preparing to amputate a limb. He cleared his throat, a sharp sound that echoed off the stone walls of the house. "Let us be unequivocal about the legal standing of this property." Sterling began, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the garden where the neighbors were straining to hear. He held up the deed displaying the official seal of the state of Georgia. "Mr. Desmond Rosewood and Mrs. Patricia Rosewood, you have spent the last 30 years operating under a significant misconception. You have told your friends, your church members, and your children that you are the homeowners of 450 Tuxedo Road. That statement is legally false." Desmond stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion and rising panic. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. "Harrison, what are you doing? I have the title. It is in the safe. My mother gave me this house when I got married." Sterling shook his head slowly, a gesture of pity mixed with disdain. "Your mother did not give you this house, Desmond. She allowed you to occupy it. In 1995, concerned about your lack of financial acumen and your tendency toward impulsive spending, Mrs. Rosewood placed this entire estate into the Rosewood Family Irrevocable Trust. You are not the owners. You are, in the eyes of the law, tenants at will, beneficiaries with residency privileges, subject to strict conditions." He turned a page of the document, the paper crisp and loud in the silence. "The trust agreement which you signed on October 4, 1995, clearly outlines the terms of your residency. It states that in exchange for living rent-free in a property valued at $4 million, the occupants must act as fiduciaries. You are the caretakers of the Rosewood legacy. This includes the physical structure of the home, the land, and the specific chattel assets listed in Schedule A." Sterling looked up, his eyes locking onto Patricia, who was trembling in her chair. "Schedule A includes the antique furniture, the art collection, and most importantly, the instruments. Specifically, one Giuseppe Galliano cello crafted in 1780. Patricia let out a whimper. She looked at the pool, then at Rose, then at the lawyer. But it was just an old thing in the attic," she stammered. "We didn't know it was part of a contract. We just thought it was Grandma's old junk." Sterling's expression hardened. "Ignorance of the contract you signed is not a defense, Mrs. Rosewood. Paragraph 4, Section 2 is explicit. It states that the sale, transfer, or damage of any Schedule A asset without the express written consent of the trustee is a material breach of the lease agreement. The cello was not yours to sell. It was the property of the trust. It was in essence the rent you paid for living here." He paused to let the weight of his words sink in. "By selling the Galliano to a third party for cash, you did not just sell a musical instrument, you defaulted on your lease. You effectively stopped paying your rent. And in the state of Georgia, when a tenant destroys the landlord's property and violates the lease, the landlord has the right to immediate possession." Desmond looked at his mother. He looked small, diminished, stripped of the arrogance he had worn all his life. "Mother, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You can't be serious. This is our home. We raised our children here. You can't kick us out over a violin. We will buy it back. We will pay you whatever it costs." Rose sat motionless in her wicker throne. She did not look at her son. She looked at the horizon. "It is not about the money, Desmond," she said softly, but her voice carried a terrifying finality. "It is about trust. I trusted you to protect the legacy. Instead, you sold it to dig a hole in the ground. You chose a swimming pool over your own daughter's inheritance. You chose vanity over value." Sterling stepped in, cutting off any further emotional appeal. He was the blade, and he was cutting deep. Since the breach of contract is confirmed and the asset was liquidated maliciously, the trust is exercising its nuclear option. He handed a red-lined document to Desmond. Desmond's hands shook so hard he nearly dropped it. "This is a notice to vacate," Sterling declared. "Because this is a revocable privilege and not a standard rental agreement, the standard 30-day notice does not apply. You have violated the fiduciary standard, therefore your right to occupy this premise is terminated effective immediately." The crowd gasped. I saw Mrs. Gable, the neighbor, cover her mouth with her hand. This was the scandal of the decade. The Rosewoods were not just being sued, they were being homeless. Immediately Desmond whispered, "But where will we go? All our things are here." Sterling checked his watch. "You have 72 hours to remove your personal effects. That includes your clothing, your toiletries, and any furniture not listed in Schedule A. Everything else stays. The art stays, the silver stays, the rugs stay, those belong to the trust." 72 hours. Patricia shrieked. She stood up, her face blotchy and red. "That is impossible. We have a life here. We are hosting a party." "The party is over," Mrs. Rosewood Sterling said coldly. "I suggest you ask your guests to leave so you can start packing. The locks will be changed on Tuesday at noon. Any personal items remaining inside after that time will be considered abandoned property and donated to charity." Brad, who had been restrained by the police officers near the gate, tried to shout something about tenants' rights, but Sterling ignored him completely. He turned his attention back to the shimmering blue water of the pool. "Now, regarding this construction project." Sterling walked to the edge of the pool. He looked down at the water with the expression of a man looking at a sewage leak. Clause 9 of the trust agreement forbids any structural modification to the property without architectural review and board approval. You did not ask for approval. You simply hired a contractor to tear up half an acre of historic landscaping. He turned back to face my parents. "You seem to be under the impression that you have improved the property. You have not. You have vandalized it. This pool was built on land you do not own using money you obtained through fraud. The trust does not want a swimming pool. The trust wants its English garden back." Desmond looked at the pool. 10 minutes ago it was his pride and joy. Now it was a crime scene. We can keep it," Desmond stammered. "It adds value. It is worth $50,000. Sterling laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "To whom, Mr. Rosewood?" "The trust is a historical preservation entity. This pool is an eyesore. It is a liability. It destroys the historical integrity of the 1920 estate." He pulled out the final document. It was a bill. "We have already contacted a landscape architecture firm. They will be arriving next week to begin the demolition process. The pool will be drained. The concrete will be broken up and removed. The earth will be backfilled. And the garden will be replanted with the original species of roses and boxwoods that my client planted here in 1960. He handed the bill to Desmond. "This is the estimated cost for the demolition and restoration. It includes the heavy machinery, the disposal fees for the concrete, and the landscaping labor." Desmond looked at the number at the bottom of the page. His knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. $60,000, he choked out. "Plus legal fees," Sterling added. "You are personally liable for this amount. It will be deducted from any remaining assets you have. If you cannot pay, we will garnish your pension." Patricia screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of total defeat. "We don't have $60,000. Brad took all the cash. We are ruined." Sterling closed his briefcase with a snap. "You should have thought of that before you sold a masterpiece to build a bathtub, Mrs. Rosewood." He turned to Rose. "Is there anything else?" Madame Rose stood up slowly. She walked over to where I was standing. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was warm and strong. "Yes," she said. "There is one more thing." She looked at the crowd of stunned guests. She looked at the neighbors who had come to envy us and were now witnessing our destruction. "This house will not sit empty," Rose announced. "I am appointing a new caretaker, someone who understands the value of preservation, someone who knows the difference between price and worth." She squeezed my hand. Simone will be moving in next week. She will oversee the restoration of the garden, and she will ensure that the Galliano cello remains where it belongs, in this house. My mother looked at me. Her eyes were wide with betrayal. You? She hissed. You did this? You are taking our house. I stepped forward. I did not look down. I did not apologize. I am not taking your house, Mom, I said. I am taking care of my grandmother's house. There is a difference. I looked at Desmond. You told me I was strong, Dad. You told me I could survive anything. You were right. I survived you, and now I am going to thrive. Desmond looked at me, and then he looked at the ground. He knew he had lost. He had lost the house. He had lost the money. He had lost the respect of his community. But worst of all, he had lost the right to call himself the head of this family. Sterling signaled to the police officers. Take Mr. Bradley away, he said. The bank is waiting to process the fraud charges. As the police dragged Brad toward the squad car, he was still shouting about interest rates and leverage. My parents stood alone on the patio, surrounded by the ruins of their vanity. The guests began to scatter, rushing to their cars to text the news to everyone in Atlanta. I stood next to Great-Grandma Rose. We watched the water in the pool ripple in the breeze. It was a beautiful day for a funeral. And today, we were burying the lies that had suffocated this family for 30 years. The air on the patio was thick enough to choke on. Brad stood near the edge of the pool, his face slick with sweat, his eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal. The police officers were moving closer, their hands resting on their holsters, but Brad was not ready to go down without a fight. He had spent years building this facade of the wealthy, benevolent son-in-law, and he was going to claw at the walls as they crumbled around him. He pointed a shaking finger at Sterling. "You are lying!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "This is a setup. I have the paperwork. I have the power of attorney. Desmond and Patricia signed it willingly. They knew exactly what they were doing." He turned to my parents, his eyes wide and desperate. "Tell them, Desmond. Tell them we discussed the investment strategy. Tell them you authorized the loan to build the pool. Don't let them take me." My father. Desmond looked at Brad. He looked at the man he had praised at every church picnic for 5 years. He looked at the man he had chosen over his own daughter. And for the first time he saw the cracks in the veneer. We signed a tax document. Brad Desmond stammered, his voice weak. "You said it was to lower our property taxes. You never said anything about a mortgage. You said the pool was paid for with the cello money." Brad laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "The cello money! You old fool, that cello. Money didn't even cover the concrete. Do you have any idea how much it costs to maintain a lifestyle like this? Do you know how much debt I have been juggling to keep you two looking like royalty?" I stepped forward then. I reached into my white suit jacket and pulled out the USB drive I had been saving for this exact moment. "He is right about one thing, Dad," I said, my voice calm and steady. "He has been juggling debt, but not yours. His." I looked at Brad. "I know about the gambling, Brad. I know about the bookies in Vegas. I know about the offshore account where you funneled the remaining $70,000 from the loan." Brad froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly shade of gray. "I have the bank records," I continued. "And I have the recording of you bragging about it on the phone 2 nights ago." Sterling stepped in, delivering the final legal blow. "And here is the reality of your situation, Mr. Bradley. You used the Rosewood residence as collateral for a 6-figure loan. However, since Mr. and Mrs. Rosewood do not hold the title to this property, the trust does. Therefore, the collateral you offered does not belong to the signatories." Sterling adjusted his glasses, looking at Brad with the cold indifference of an undertaker. "That means the mortgage is void. The bank has no claim on the house, but they do have a claim on the money you took. Since you obtained funds by misrepresenting ownership, that is bank fraud. Since you wired the money to an offshore account, that is wire fraud. And since you targeted 2 senior citizens to do it, that is a hate crime enhancement for elder abuse. You are looking at 20 years in federal prison, Brad. Minimum. The words hung in the air. 20 years. The life Brad had built, the lies, the suits, the cigars, it was all gone. Brad looked at the police officers who were now just 10 feet away. He looked at the pool. He looked at his pregnant wife, Ebony, who was sobbing silently into her hands. And then he snapped. The mask did not just slip. It shattered. The charming smile vanished. The respectful tone evaporated. In its place was a snarl of pure, unfiltered hatred. You people, Brad spat, his voice low and venomous. You act like you are so special. You walk around with your noses in the air playing aristocrat in your big house. But you are just a bunch of ignorant, lucky people who don't know the value of $1. He turned to Desmond. I did you a favor. I tried to leverage this dusty old museum into actual cash. But you were too stupid to understand high finance. You just wanted to sit on your porch and act like you earned it, Brad. Ebony cried out, stepping toward him. How can you say that? We are family. Brad spun on her, his eyes wild. Family. You think I married you for your personality? Ebony, you are lazy, you are spoiled, and you are drowning in debt that you think is my money. He looked at my parents, and then he let out the slur that he had probably been thinking every time he sat at their dinner table. I am done with you. I am done pretending to respect a bunch of broke ghetto lottery winners who think they are better than me just because their grandmother bought some land 60 years ago. You are nothing. You are trash wrapped in expensive clothes. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. My father swayed on his feet. The N-word hung in the air unspoken, but implied in every syllable of his rant. He had called them everything but the word itself, and the intent was clear. He had never loved them. He had never respected them. He had despised them the entire time he was stealing from them. Brad looked around the yard. He saw the shock on the neighbors' faces. He saw the police unholstering their tasers. He realized he had nowhere to go. Screw this, he screamed. He shoved a waiter holding a tray of champagne, sending glass shattering onto the patio. He bolted toward the side gate, sprinting past the pool he had built with stolen money. He is running, someone shouted. The police officers gave chase, their radios crackling. Stop, police! We watched as Brad scrambled over the fence like a common thief, tearing his expensive linen shirt on the trellis. We heard him crash through the bushes on the other side, running toward the woods, running toward a freedom that no longer existed. He was gone. But the wreckage he left behind was total. Ebony collapsed onto the pavement, wailing. It was a sound of pure heartbreak. Her husband, the father of her children, had just revealed himself to be a monster. My parents stood there frozen in the center of the patio. They looked small, they looked old. The illusion of their perfect life had been stripped away, leaving them naked and shivering in the Georgia heat. Slowly, painfully, my father turned his head. He looked at the empty spot where Brad had stood. Then he looked at Rose, who sat impassively on her throne. And finally he looked at me. Simone, he whispered. He took a step toward me. His hands were shaking. Simone, please, you have to stop this. You have to talk to Grandma. We didn't know. He tricked us. My mother joined in, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. We are your parents, Simone, she sobbed. We raised you. You can't let her kick us out. Where will we go? What about Ebony? She is pregnant. You can't be this cruel. They reached out for me. They wanted the daughter who fixed things. They wanted the daughter who absorbed the pain so they didn't have to. They wanted the mule to carry the load one last time. I looked at them. I looked at the fear in their eyes. A week ago, that fear would have broken me. I would have folded. I would have begged Rose to let them stay. But then I remembered the dinner table. I remembered my father telling me I didn't need a pool because I was strong. I remembered him saying I was built for survival. I remembered my mother watching me cry over the empty cello case and telling me to get over it. I stepped back out of their reach. I smoothed the lapel of my white suit. I am not being cruel, Mom, I said, my voice as cold as the water in the pool. I am being a rosewood. I looked at my father. You told me I could survive anything, Dad. You told me I didn't need help because I was like Grandma Rose. You were right. I am. I gestured to the house, the garden, and the empty cello stand that would soon be filled. I am taking care of the assets, just like the trust requires. But what about us? Desmond pleaded. What about us? I looked him dead in the eye. You are strong, Dad. You have thick skin. You were built for survival. I am sure you will figure it out. I turned my back on them. I walked over to Great Grandma Rose and offered her my arm. Ready to go inside, Grandma? I asked. Rose took my arm. She stood up, casting one last look at her son. Yes, Simone. The air out here smells like trash. Let us go listen to some music. We walked into the house, leaving my parents, my sister, and their ruined dreams on the patio. Behind us, the police sirens wailed in the distance, hunting down the man they had loved more than me. I did not look back. I had a garden to restore, and for the first time in my life, I was finally home. The fall of the House of Rosewood was not a loud crash. It was a slow, agonizing slide into irrelevance. The 72 hours Sterling gave my parents to vacate were the longest 3 days in the history of the neighborhood. Moving vans did not line up to help. Friends did not come over with casseroles. The neighbors simply watched from behind their curtains as Desmond and Patricia carried boxes of clothes out of the mansion they had pretended to own for 30 years. Justice, when it finally arrived, was swift and unyielding. Brad's trial was the talk of Atlanta for a week, but not in the way he had always craved. He wanted to be famous. He ended up infamous. The evidence on the USB drive was irrefutable. The wire fraud, the bank fraud, and the hate crime enhancement for targeting the elderly resulted in a sentence that ensured he would not see a swimming pool or a golf course for a very long time. The judge sentenced Bradley Miller to 15 years in federal prison. When the gavel came down, Brad did not look at his wife or his children. He looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw the terrifying realization that he was not the smartest man in the room. He was just the one who got caught. Ebony did not fare much better. With Brad in prison and his assets seized by the government to pay restitution, her life of leisure evaporated overnight. The luxury SUV was repossessed. The credit cards were declined. She was left with 3 children, no husband, and no skills. The last I heard, she had moved into a small rental duplex on the outskirts of the city. To make ends meet, the golden child who used to mock my work ethic was now standing on her feet for 8 hours a day. She found a job as a cashier at a discount grocery store. I went there once, just to see. I watched from the end of the aisle as she scanned coupons for a customer looking tired and broken. I did not say hello. I did not offer to help. She had made her choice when she sided with the thief. Now she had to live with the receipt. As for my parents, Rose was true to her word. She did not throw them on the street. She placed them in a 1-bedroom apartment in a building owned by one of her charitable foundations. It is clean, it is safe, and it is incredibly small. They have a kitchenette, a small living area, and a view of a brick wall. There is no space for entertaining. There is no guest room, and there is certainly no pool. They call me sometimes. My mother complains about the noise from the neighbors. My father complains about the lack of respect he gets from the building superintendent. They talk about the past as if it were a stolen dream. They still blame me, of course. In their version of the story, I am the villain who stole their inheritance. They will never understand that you cannot inherit what you have not earned. I stopped visiting them. I pay their utility bills directly, not out of love, but out of duty. That is the extent of our relationship now. A monthly transaction. 3 months have passed since the party. The seasons have changed and the air in Buckhead has turned crisp and cool. But inside the gates of the estate, everything is blooming. I moved in the week after they left. The first thing I did was open every window in the house. I let the wind blow through the hallways, chasing away the scent of lies and stale ambition. I hired a team to restore the garden, replanting the rose bushes my great-grandmother loved. But there was one feature I decided to keep: the pool. Sterling wanted to fill it in. He said it was a monument to fraud, but I looked at it and saw something else. I saw a victory lap. I am standing on the balcony now, holding a glass of vintage red wine. I look down at the backyard. The water is still blue, shimmering in the twilight. But the feeling is different. It is peaceful. Great-Grandma Rose is sitting on the patio wrapped in a cashmere blanket. She is reading a book, a small smile playing on her lips. She looks younger than she has in years. The weight of carrying a disappointing son has been lifted off her shoulders. She finally has the air she deserved. And then there is the music. Maya is sitting by the edge of the pool. The Galliano cello is resting against her shoulder. She is playing Bach the Suite No. 1 in G major. The deep, rich notes float over the water, mixing with the sound of the wind in the trees. She plays with a confidence I have never seen before. She is no longer the little girl who was bullied in Sunday school. She is the mistress of this domain. She finishes the piece and looks up at me. She waves her bow. "Mommy," she calls out. "Did you hear that? I heard it, baby." I call back. It was perfect. I watch her put the cello back in its case. The case that was once empty is now full. Just like this house. Just like our lives. My parents wanted a legacy of status. They wanted people to envy them. They wanted to be seen. But in their desperate need to be seen, they failed to see the people right in front of them. They failed to see the talent in their granddaughter. They failed to see the loyalty in their daughter. They failed to see the wisdom in their mother. I turn away from the railing and walk back into the house. I pass the mirror in the hallway, the one my mother used to check her makeup in before church. I look at my reflection. I see a woman who is tired, yes, but I also see a woman who is free. I walk over to the camera that has been recording this journey. I adjust the lens one last time. I want you to see me. I want you to really see me. I raise my glass to the lens. The wine catches the light, glowing like a ruby. They told me I was the black sheep. They told me I was the workhorse. They told me I was built to survive pain. They were right. I survived. And because I survived, I was the only one left standing when the house of cards collapsed. You might think this is a sad story. You might think it is tragic that a family was destroyed over money. But you would be wrong. This family wasn't destroyed by me. It was destroyed by the lie that you can treat people like property and expect them to stay loyal. I take a sip of the wine. It tastes like victory. Family is blood. That is biology. You don't get to choose it. But respect. That is something else entirely. Respect is the currency of relationships. You have to earn it, you have to save it, and you have to spend it wisely. My parents, my sister and Brad, they spent their lives writing checks their character couldn't cash. They thought they were rich in status, but they were poor in integrity. I look straight into the camera, my gaze unflinching. They went bankrupt in both. And me, I am just fine. I have my daughter, I have my grandmother, I have my music, and I have the deed. I smile, a genuine warm smile that reaches my eyes. Thank you for watching. And remember, the next time someone tells you to know your place, make sure you own the building they are standing in. The camera pulls back slowly, moving away from my face, gliding through the open French doors out onto the balcony. It rises up, capturing the image of Rose reading her book and Maya dancing by the pool. The music swells, a triumphant orchestral chord. The image fades to black.